So here we are back on the 82 300D, and it's time to address the suspension. The main problem I noticed, look at those bushings. That is a completely rotted bushing. So we're going to go ahead and pull out the lower control arm, and actually someone's already done the ball joints, it looks like. Let's check this one over here. Yeah, those ball joints boots are still good. They're not ripped. They're still intact. Yeah, so somebody already did those. But we're going to do the tie rods, the center link, and we'll throw some new shocks on there. And the brakes, the previous owner, sorry, that's dust from the paint shop, but they put some new brakes. You can see it has fresh pads in there, and the rotors are good. And they actually, looks like they powder coated the brakes and did some new brake lines, so that's good. So we're going to go ahead and basically get these lower control arms out of here and change those bushings. Let's look over on this side. Yeah, that one's a little, actually over here, hey look, I can see there's a little twisting that was going on right here. So we're going to go ahead and get those out and replace those. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and pop off the other side while I'm at it. There we go. All right, caliper's not going anywhere now. There's our bearing. Looks like the original seal back there. So I've actually got an extra set of rotors and an extra set of seals. So we're going to go ahead and throw some new rotors on there and put in some new seals. Next thing we need to do there is take off this dust shield. All right. Now, these are definitely the original tie rods because Mercedes did castle nuts. See if you can see that, see if it'll focus. There you go. See, there's a castle nut with a cotter pin. See, there's the cotter pin going through it right there. So we got to get those cotter pins out and then remove these castle nuts and break that loose with the tie rod little ball joint tool. I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this, but to get the pins out of the castle nut, you got to bend the tips back. There we go. And then you hook it. There we go. That one came out with not too much problem. And we don't have castle nuts. The aftermarket, or sorry, not aftermarket, but any replacement, Mercedes, Phoebe, Limforder, any of the people that make aftermarket, or Mercedes itself, they no longer use the castle nut and cotter pin. That's an old school design. Everybody uses lock nuts now. Castle nut and cotter pin is better. That's a safer way, but for some reason manufacturers no longer do that. So we'll go ahead and just start breaking these loose. And those are only on there like 30 foot-pounds, so they're very easy to break loose. There it is. There's the cotter pin right there. mean, that's been on there for 40 years. So sometimes they're hard to get out. There it is. See, we gotta bend the edges like that. There we go. There's a better angle of it. You can see it right here. I got to get that little guy out of there. Oh, there we go. All right, while you guys weren't watching, I went ahead and got all of my castle nuts and cotter pins removed. I think there's one more. Yep, right there. Now I'm going to break all of those loose, and we can pull out the linkage and lay it on the ground here. Okay, what we have left over here, this is the steering shock, and there's a bolt there and a bolt, there's a bolt that runs through it and a nut right there. I think it's a 17 millimeter. So we'll go ahead and get that out of here. It's got a wrench up here on the top of it. And that's it. That's out of there. And it's important to save this bolt and nut. So I just put them right back through there because we're going to reuse that. One tie rod left on the pitman arm, which is right here. So we can go ahead and break that loose. Now we have all our front suspension steering linkage removed. See, all across here. So we'll clean under here a little bit, wipe anything down, and then we are going to, next we're going to lower the car down and pop off the lower ball joint and the upper ball joint. First, I need to put the spring compressor on here. We're going to compress this spring so it takes the load off of the lower control arm. That way it doesn't go flying down or shooting out and hit us and kill us. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that now. And here's that steering linkage we just removed. Left tie rod, center link, steering shock. I guess that absorbs or dampens any jolts or vibrations in the steering. And our right tie rod. So before we can take off the lower control arm and the main steering spindle, we're going to need to, and we're replacing these shocks anyway, but we're going to need to unbolt the shocks. Now, before I do this, the camera's going to go sideways, you guys, but I have a jack under that control arm and I have weight on it. So it's relieving the tension from this shock. That way it makes it easier to get out, and that way when you remove the final nut, it doesn't make a bang and popping noise. And so let's go ahead and get this out of here. So to get access to the shock on this side, you need to remove the air cleaner housing, and we're going to remove that. And also, there's a leaf in there. And also we're going to put in a fresh air filter, of course. So let's go ahead and get that out of here. All right, guys, I did not show inserting the spring compressor. You see it's in there, and that spring is compressed. Because that's really, it's a nightmare getting that thing in there and lined up properly. But now we're going to break our top ball joint loose and remove this spindle. And notice, just for safety's sake, I have a jack underneath here, and I want a little bit of clearance between that jack. So there we go. So that way, when we break it loose, it can fall down on the jack stand. But as you can see, we've compressed our spring, and it's actually no longer in the spring seat, so there shouldn't be any pressure on there. That's just a safety measure. So let's go ahead and get our ball joint breaker on there. And it's good to grease this up right here so you don't tear the boot. See, this boot is not torn up here. So we want to go ahead and grease this before putting it on there. All right, you see I've got our tool on there. And we will go ahead, and it'll pop loose in a second. Oh, there it goes. That scares me every time, guys. See, this is our spindle. See, it's loose now. So let's raise the car up, and actually you can see how even though we had a little space and our spring was compressed, it fell down onto the jack. That's why we do that. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the car now, and we'll see if that spring stays where it's supposed to. So there was a little pressure on the spring, but not much. You can see it's still in there. There we go. I can pull down on this control arm, and that spring is just loose up in there. So we're going to go ahead and remove that control arm. That's a nut right there. And I'm also going to go ahead and remove the ball joint. That does feel a little loose, even though the boot has not broken. So we're going to go ahead. Yeah, I mean, that's real loose. It should be tighter than that. So we're going to go ahead and replace the ball joints too. And I'm inspecting our upper ball joint. So that's pretty loose. Shouldn't be that loose, should be stiffer. So we're going to go ahead and replace our upper control arms also. Let's go ahead and get this shock out of here. Here's a bolt, 10 millimeter back there and 10 millimeter right there. So we'll go ahead and get that out of here. All right, if you see all the way back there, that is the control rod bushing. There's the control rod. That's basically triangulates the lower control arm. You have a lower control arm here that comes out and then goes back to the control rod bushing. That's an interesting design by Mercedes. Most cars just have an A-arm as the lower control arm, and an A-arm is the upper control arm. What Mercedes did is they did an upper control arm, and they basically made it an A-arm by tying it into the sway bar. So there's really your triangle, and then there is your triangle. On most cars, especially US cars, you just see a lower control arm that attaches here and right there and makes a triangle. Actually, the 116 chassis, I think, does it like that. So we want to get this nut out, or this bolt out that holds the control rod into the lower control arm. To do that, let's get all this junk out of here. To do that, you have to remove the spring perch. And that's just a 13 millimeter. But that's why you have to get your spring out of the way. And my Milwaukee 3/8 electric drive is sent back to Milwaukee for repairs. And I really missed that thing, because that would already have this, that would already have these out. All this over to the parts washer and wash everything. Holding the bolt on top. Yeah, there we go. All right, and then to get that out, give it a couple of taps with a hammer. There we go. There we go, and we got that out. And what you have there, really interesting design. You have these, it's like a metal puck like that. And then you have an actual rubber bushing, and those are you rarely ever see those things worn out. I mean, it's just a bushing that goes around there. Not much stress on it. But now, this control arm is loose. This will slip out. There's a slot right here, and this control rod will slip out when we undo the lower control arm. To get that ball joint loose, it is a 22 millimeter. 15/16 will actually get there. All right, now we get our ball joint remover tool. And you guys have seen this many times. I'll show it, the part number again. It's just a small pitman arm puller made by OTC, part number 8149. Works great. And Paulaman uses this too. If you guys haven't seen Paulaman's channel, he has outstanding Mercedes videos. You guys should definitely get on there and check out his, I think his latest video was redoing the sunroof on a W126. And he has great content. There we go. Control rod bushing that goes right here. And see, they're always in great shape. I rarely ever see these that need replacing. But you see that little tab right there? That tab aligns with that notch, and that notch goes around the control rod right there. That's how you know if it's in the correct orientation. Same goes for the bottom. And there is our spindle, and even though the boot is not ripped, we want to go ahead and replace that ball joint. Next thing we want to do is remove this lower control arm. So to get that lower control arm out, I'm actually going to raise the car. We just put a, it might be a 22. I think that one's a 24 millimeter. Yeah, that one's a 24. Let's get that thing broken loose. There we go. This bolt, you see how the control arm's moving? If you adjust it from the other side, they're on, there you go. See, it's on like an elliptical eccentric, and see, watch the lower control arm and watch how this moves. See how it moves in and out? That's how you can dial in your camber and caster. We need to go ahead and get this guy out of here. All right, so I have removed the bolt, and actually there's our eccentric. I need to put that back on here so I don't lose it. There we go. See, and there's the way these turn, there's a little slot in the actual bolt, and that eccentric goes in that slot. So when you turn the bolt, that eccentric rotates with it. Pretty cool suspension design. You know, old school American cars just use shims, and this is much cooler. So now that we have that bolt out, we can just remove the lower control arm. There she goes. And that is why we are replacing that control arm. Look at that. That's why we went through all this trouble. That bushing is toast. It's toast on this side too. That's just a rotted mess. You know, we're redoing all the front suspension, so it's all getting replaced, but this is what triggered it. This was the big, there's your sign right there. So we're gonna go ahead and knock out these bushings with the air hammer, and then we'll get some new bushings in there. All right, I just want to show you guys how we remove bushings from lower control arms. First, you have to actually use a chisel. Let me go get the piece, I'll show you. So holding the bushings in there, you have this aluminum, piece that slides in there. You can see the end is chamfered, and it slides through, and the other end is chamfered, and that keeps it from coming out. So the way you get that out, you actually use a chisel and knock in the edges. See if you can see that. Use a chisel and knock in all the edges, and then you can tap this out. But both ends from the factory are chamfered like that, so it goes through the bushing and keeps them from coming out. So once you get that out, you have, this is a 175 psi air hammer, and there's a lot of pressure coming out of an 80-gallon two-stage compressor. But if you have something like this, then you can do this. There we go. And it literally, there you go, that's what the inside of the bushings look like. But this will literally press out that bushing. There you go. There you go. You see where I hit the concrete? This tool is no joke. It'll mess you up. But that's how you get them out. Well, guys, my camera died last night, so I couldn't show finishing some of the work I was doing. But I went ahead and used the air hammer and got the bushings out of the lower control arm. And I went ahead and separated the hubs from the rotors. And I'm in the process right now. We're gonna put some new rotors. Here's the hubs. So I'm cleaning them up in the parts washer. You can see there's the old bearings. We're gonna throw some new bearings in there. And over here, I have the driver's side. That is the spindle. And I'm about to knock out the ball joint. Y'all have seen this in some videos. You basically hit it with a slug and knock out the ball joint. And then we're going to press in some new ball joints. So let me go ahead and finish getting these cleaned up. We'll knock in the new bearings, and then we'll bang out the ball joints, and then we're going to press in the bushings into the lower control arm, and then start reassembly on this side of the car. Guys, nothing glamorous about this. I'm just cleaning out all the old grease from the original hub. So I'll get that done, and then we'll go knock out the ball joint over there. And we're going to repack all these with new bearings, new grease, and new seals, of course. All right, guys, we have the spindle in the vise, and the procedure, this is literally in the factory service manual. You have to bang out that ball joint. It's pretty violent, and you definitely don't want to hold it here, because if it breaks loose, it's going to slip through and hit your hand, and you can break your hand. But the way you do it, we'll see. We got to budge a little bit. And you literally have to keep doing this until you bang the ball joint out. So I'll come back. I'll do this a few more times, guys, then I'll come back and show you the removed ball joint. All right, guys, we just knocked the ball joint out. Comes out from, the bottom. And even though the boots were not ripped on this, you can see the boot's still in good condition. It's very loose. So since we're overhauling all the front suspension, we're just going to do this anyway. That should be very, very stiff. So that one's slightly, it's got 70,000 miles on it. And to be honest, they will last, they can last up to 150,000 miles. But since we have all this suspension out, we'll go ahead and replace them. All right, guys, now that I have the ball joint out, I like to just wash the spindle, get everything cleaned up. I'm not sure what Mercedes calls this. On hot rods, I've always called it the spindle. I'm sure Mercedes has a fancy name. It's almost like a, yeah, I mean, that is a spindle. That's what that is. I'm sure they have a strange German name for it. But we'll clean this off, and then we're going to go ahead and throw a coat of paint on it, get it back to factory original. All right, guys, we got the spindle on the press here, and I just pressed in the ball joint using the special ball joint tool. This tool is fantastic. And we'll show you what it looks like here. Here we go. Take our tool off, and there we go. We have a perfectly pressed in ball joint. It is perfectly flush along the bottom. And there you go. Here we are pressing the control arm bushings in, and you'll notice the bushing, they have a little tab right there and right there, and that tells you the orientation. Orientation, is that a word? That tells you how to orient the bushing. And basically, here's the control arm. You see your ball joint's going to go through here. So we're looking at the side of the control arm. So if you're looking at the side, those little tabs need to draw a line perpendicular through. So here's the control arm. Those tabs need to face vertically. So when you put that up back in the car, there'll be a tab directly on the bottom if you're looking at it from under the car. So we'll go ahead and push this back in. And that's almost there. We need to get a little bit more. This one needs to go in a little bit more. I'm just going to get a little more height here. There we go. Want to get a little more force. There we go. That's got it. All right. So then you can see our tab there and there. They're correctly aligned. Now we have to go put in the center pin. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so Mercedes has this aluminum insert, right? Just goes down through there. Let's see if we can. There we go. Now the way the insert is held in there, see this side from the factory, it comes with a bezel, right? So the other side, see, it's not chamfered, or there's no bezel. So we have to create that bezel, and that'll hold that aluminum piece in there. And the way to do that, the lug nut of your 123 or 126 is a perfect fit for that bezel. So we're going to put our lug nut in there like so, and then we'll just give it a little tap. All right, let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, we need to go a little bit more than that. There we go. Boom. Now we have our perfect, see how it's now bezeled and it won't come out, or chamfered, whatever you want to call that. There you go. And now that piece cannot come out. And this is ready to, we're going to throw some paint on it, and then put it back on the car. So what we're doing now is we're going to put in our new bearings. Here's our spindle hats. They're called hats. These are what attach to the, let's see here. There we go. Those attach to your brake rotor. And we're going to put some new rotors on here. Now these are the Zimmerman rotors. Guys, these are, I think these are the best ones. Mercedes, of course, those are good. Zimmerman, these are excellent rotors. There's some other brands out there that just are kind of shitty and don't last a long time. I like the coating these ship with. Keeps them from rusting before you get them on the car. Of course, that coating wears off, but it stays on the edge here, so you won't get rust along the edge. And really, that really doesn't matter, but I'm kind of a picky, meticulous guy, and I like that. So the first thing we want to do is pack. Here's our seal. Here's our outer bearing. And here is our inner bearing. These are made by SKF. These guys make excellent bearings and excellent seals. Highly recommend them. And first thing we want to do is inspect the races. So the race, see, they ship with new races. If you have a damaged or worn out race, the race is what the bearing rides in. See? Bearing rides in the race. Now, races are normally, you only need to change them on, you know, super high mileage vehicles, or if there's actual damage to the race. And I'm looking, there's the race right there. And I can see they're absolutely perfect condition. There's not a mark on them. Yeah, these are great. So there's no need to change these races. They only have 68,000 miles on them. Races will last hundreds of thousands of miles if the bearing's properly lubricated and it's not damaged. So we're going to go ahead and get some of our Temkin grease, and we need to pack the bearing. So to pack the bearing, you literally pack it. You want to get the grease all down in the bearings. You can see how when we pack it in there, it squirts out the sides. See, there's a gap there, and what we're doing real fast is mashing the grease into the bearing. See how we mash it in there? You just do it real quick. And when I'm done, you'll see all the grease is gone from my hand because it's packed into the bearing. All right, there you go. All that grease that was on my hand is now up in the bearing. And we're going to drop our bearing in there. It only goes in one way. You can't mess it up. Also, we want to put some grease down inside the hub, or I'm sorry, the hat. We'll put some down inside there. There we go. Don't need to go crazy, just glop it down in there. Okay, now the seal. So we can see the seal, and on the back there's actually a little spring. That spring right there, that little spring, is what keeps that seal tight against the spindle, so no dirt or debris gets in there. So we're literally going to put that seal right there. And I have a, I think it's a 32 millimeter. It's a socket that fits around that, and I can just tap it in. Let me go get that. There we go. It is a 2-inch socket. And that fits right around my seal and lets me tap it in. Almost. There we go. And you see we have the seal perfectly flush with the back of the hat. And then we have our little protective boot right there, you know, that kind of goes around the spindle. And behind there, remember, that's where our spring is. All right. So next thing we want to do is attach it to the rotor. And we press it down on there. Now, of course, you got to line the holes up. But you will see there's two sets of holes. One set is near the outside edge and the other set is kind of pushed back into the middle. Then that's closer to the outside. The only place the bolts will fit are the hole in the middle right there. So we need to get some blue Loctite and put our bolts back in there. All right, guys, we got our impact. Now, keep in mind, this is a high torque Ingersoll Rand. It's also running off an 80-gallon air compressor at 175 PSI. So, and it's also set on full torque. Don't try this with your little dinky, 30-gallon air compressor and your Harbor Freight impact. This is also running with a 1/2-inch line and 3/8 hose connection. So this is getting a huge amount of air under a lot of pressure. Otherwise, you're going to not going to get them tight enough. All right, I'll switch to my other bit, which fits in there better. All right, guys, there we go. Now let's go ahead and pack the outer bearing and then we'll start getting this car reassembled. All right, guys, we have the bearings packed, the hats installed back onto new Zimmerman rotors. We've painted the control arm and spindle, got the new bushing in, and got our new ball joint in. So now it's time to get this stuff back on the car. So before we reinstall that on the car, I want to change this upper control arm. You can see the sway bar bushings are fine, and this feels a little loose, but that's I'm sure this still had a lot of miles in it. But our bushings up here, you can see how it's twisted a little bit and the bushings have started to rot. So we're going to go ahead and remove this upper control arm, and we'll put in a new upper control arm on both sides of the car. So let's go ahead and get this guy out of here. To do that, first you have to take off this bolt on the end right here that holds it to the sway bar. So I'm going to get my impact to do that. Okay, that's a 17 millimeter. You can see I've taken it out. And what you want to pay attention to is how these are oriented. You basically have a big washer in the back and then a little washer that goes on the outside of it. And you can see this big washer is kind of concave, so that washer fits into it and goes up against the car like that. So we'll make sure we keep that same orientation. And then we need to pop out this bushing. There's the end of the sway bar. Pop out that bushing, and then we'll go inside the inner fender here under the engine compartment, under the hood, and we'll remove the bolt that goes through there. The best way to get that bolt out, we're inside the inner fender, and the bolt for the upper control arm runs right through there. And you can see I've got a wrench on the bolt head back there. And basically, if you remove the windshield wiper reservoir, you can get an impact that goes through all your wires and lines and connections and gets right there, and you can get that thing unscrewed, which I've already done off camera. The passenger side is a little easier because you can see there's the bolt there, so you have a lot of room to work with. And since I have the extension already on here, I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. Like that. Get your socket on the back. And there we go. So we don't need to actually remove the bolt on the passenger side yet, but I just wanted to break it loose since I've already got my socket and extension set up. Okay, so the tricky part is getting the bolt out. You want to tap it through there, but you notice back here, see the brake line? It's kind of in the way. There's the bolt there. So you have to sometimes bend the brake line just a little bit. There we go, out of the way. There we go, so it can clear right there. I guess they installed this at the factory and then put the brake system in, and that's why you have to do that. So we're gonna get a little tap and just kind of tap that out of there. First, to relieve pressure from it, I'm going to pop out this bushing it makes it attached to the sway bar, and that'll relieve pressure and make it easy to get that bolt through. Now that we have the bolt out and the bushing out, you can pull out that upper control arm, and yeah, we can see here, see how that bushing has like rotted and started to come out of one side. So that's not good. That's why we're replacing this. All right, I've got a new one in the box we're going to put in. So now we have everything out, all the suspension removed, and we're going to start the reassembly process. Here is our new control arm. Looks awesome. And let's just go ahead and wipe it down up there. And we're going to put that back through there. And, you know, since it's new, you have to press it in there a little bit to get it to line up with the holes. And sometimes I use a block of wood, like a little dowel, and I'll tap it. So we'll see how close that is. All right, I just want to show you a little trick for how you reinstall the sway bar into the new control arm. So in order to get the sway bar, you know, perpendicular, so you can actually get the bushing in there and put the bolt in the end, that's the method I use right there. I put my little platform from Race Ramps there with a jack stand, and you lower the car onto the jack stand so it forces that sway bar up. Otherwise, the sway bar is you know, angled down like that, and you can't get the bolt in the end of it. Because what you're going for, see, you need the end of the sway bar to be sticking through like that, and you have to put some pressure on it to get it to do that, and then you can put your bolt in. So let's go ahead and put some blue Loctite on that and get that reattached, and then we can put our spindle and lower control arm back on. Also, guys, when you retighten, see, I've got the nut back on there and the bolt back through there. You don't want to crank it down tight until you have all of your suspension reassembled and the car back onto the ground. Otherwise, same goes for the lower control arm. If you tighten those while the suspension is drooping, then when you put it on the ground, it's going to bind and it's going to twist those bushings as the car sits down on the suspension. So you want to loosely put it on, put the wheels, get everything reassembled, then lower the car. I have, you know, race ramps that I put it on so I can easily, I have these little ramps that I can put the wheels on. So it gives me like a, you know, 2 feet of clearance where I can get on my back and go under the car, tighten that lower control arm bushing, and then come back up top and tighten this bushing when the suspension is loaded. Before we can attach our lower control arm, we need to actually pull it out of here. There we go. We need to actually connect it to the control rod, because once it's in there, the control rod won't come out. I guess that's a design feature because you would never want that to happen on the road. So let's see if we can get these two together. There we go. And sometimes to get the holes to line up for the lower control arm, I will tap it with a rubber mallet. Boom, perfect. You see our control rod is actually going into the lower control arm. Now we will put our bolt back in there. There we go, we can put our eccentric on here. Whoops. Like that. And remember, we don't want to crank this nut down until we've got the suspension back on the ground and under load. So we're just going to tighten it just a little bit. There we go, that's loose. All right. Remember, we need to tighten that when we put it back on the ground. And now, right here, if you remember, we had the bushing right there, the top bushing. And then that goes in there like that. Sometimes you gotta coerce that in there. There we go. We'll put our other bushing in there like that. And then we're gonna put our puck. That's the metal puck. And then our lock nut. And we can go ahead and tighten that down. So I'll go ahead and tighten that, and then we'll move to the putting the spindle and ball joint back on. All right, now we want to put our spring perch back on here. We cleaned it up in the parts washer. There we go. We want to Loctite those screws or those bolts. And we'll snug these guys back down, and then we can move to the spindle, ball joint, and attach that all to the upper control arm. Through the lower control arm. And put the nut on there just to hold her in place. Then we want to take the nut off the upper control arm. Now we need to lower the car onto the jack stand and compress all this back into place. And it's going to push our spring back into the spring perch, and then get our spindle over the upper ball joint so we can attach our nut. All right, guys, you see how we have the jack right there? We're going to lower the car onto the jack, and as that jack hits, it's going to raise the spindle onto that ball joint. And this, you got to be careful because the car can slip on the jack, so we really got to pay attention here. Okay. We can see our spring has correctly reseated, and I know how it's correct because here's the tip of the spring, and it's right in the exact location it's supposed to be on the perch. See that little hole underneath here? See my fingers underneath it? That hole comes up to a dead end right here, and that's where that spring, where the spring is cut, that's where it's supposed to fit. The hole is a little drainage hole. So let's get that straightened out. Looks like we got about another inch to go. See if we can do this without the jack slipping. Okay, there we go. A little bit more and it's going to break through there, and we'll put the nut on it. All right, that should be good. Oh, a little bit more. All right, so we're going to put our nut on now. And we want to tighten that a few turns. All right, there you can see now that the suspension is actually holding the spring in place. We got a nut there, we got our ball joint nut there, and our spring is being held in place by those. I'm going to tap the spring around just a little bit to make sure it seats better, and then we'll go ahead and torque the ball joint down and the upper control arm nut, and then we'll go ahead and remove our spring compressor. So I'm going to go ahead and put in our new Bilstein Hd Shock. I use the HDs because if you don't get the HD, there's too much roll in the car. The HD is close to what they installed from the factory. Let's see. Let me get that part number for you. There's the part number for the HD Shock. 24-007047. That's for the 300D for the HD Shock. And this guy. All right. And then there's actually, if you don't put this bushing here, it doesn't tighten down correctly. You got to put the bushing on the top. It goes like that. Now I'll just turn that out of the way. And we'll see if we can get this guy in here. What's wrong, buddy? Hey. There you go. Yeah. Got to compress the shock to get it under there, or you'll hit your fender. Now let's lower the car, and we're actually going to put the jack under here and remove our spring compressor. And as far as the suspension, main suspension on this side, we're done. We still got to put the caliper, the rotor and hat, and the tie rods on, but we've done the heavy lifting over here. So let's go ahead and lower it down and get that spring compressor out. Now it's time to put our tie rods back on. Oh, there we go. Come on. There we go. All right, I'll go ahead and torque those down. They go to about 30 foot-pounds or so. All right, now that we have our beautiful brand new tie rod in place, we're getting near the end on this driver's side. Next thing we want to do is put the spindle and caliper back on. Fresh bearings and seal. Nice. Our spindle nut on. Remember, this is hand tight until you get the play out. All right, see, there's play. I can move it forward and backward. Play, no play. And you don't want any play, so it spins freely. And that's where you want it, right there. Okay, we've got our grease cap cleaned out, and Mercedes says to pack some grease in the end of the grease cap. And now we're going to put our little copper pin down here in the end. So I think that's for some sort of radio interference, or it could be to stir up the grease in the grease cap. No, because the grease cap is spinning at the same speed as that. So I'm pretty sure that's for radio interference. I don't even know if that's applicable in modern day, but we'll put it back on there. And we just tap that cap on. I have a big hammer here. I'm just gently tapping. It was the closest one. All right, we got that caliper back on. That's a new rotor, obviously. Those pads are super thick. I mean, they might have a couple of 1,000 miles on them, not even that. And they're already messing up my pretty new rotors. So we are done with the driver's side. There's the new control arm, new bushing, new upper control arm, new ball joint on the lower control arm. Those are new calipers, new brake lines, new shocks. So this side is done, you guys. And oh, we got our new tie rod. Here we go. There's our new tie rod. And now I need to go repeat that entire process on the other side of the car, which I'm not going to record. Y'all will just see the final product. So you'll see that probably in like 5 seconds. See ya. All right, somebody post in the comments what you noticed that I missed when I was reassembling the driver's side. I'll give you a few seconds. Pause the video, think about it, and type in the comment, and then press play, and I'm going to show you. So I just had to remove the caliper and the rotor because I forgot to put the dust shield back on. Whoops. I thought something looked funny. So we're going to go ahead and screw that back on. Then we'll put the rotor and caliper back on there. All right. This was a lot of work, you guys, but we now have all brand new front suspension. Of course, new rotors. Those are new calipers. Those are new brake pads. New outer tie rod. New shocks, new ball joints, new upper control arm, new lower control arm bushings. There's our center link and steering shock. Absolutely beautiful under here. So now, let's go down here. And there you go. There's a good view. See all the shiny new parts? That is all the front suspension. So this car should ride amazing now. And it was all triggered by that bad bushing I saw over on this side. So now we need to lower the car. And I'm going to lower it onto ramps so I can get underneath it. I can probably get underneath it without the ramps. But what we have to do is lower it and then tighten the lower control arm bolt, the upper control arm bolt, which is inside the inner fender, and then the nuts on top of the shocks. All that needs to be done while the car is under load. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, guys. I'm actually able to get under here without putting it on stands. And now we can tighten the lower control arm bolt. You see how when the car is under load, this lower control arm levels out to where it's parallel with the ground. So when it's up in the air, the arm is hanging down like that. And if you tighten that bolt, when you put it down on the way to the car, that bushing will twist and possibly bind. So that's why you do it with the weight on the car. So we're going to go ahead, tighten this up now, and then we'll go up and do the shocks in a second. Also, guys, same goes for tightening the upper control arm bolt. Remember, it runs through here, and that's where our upper control arm is attached. We just tighten that down once the car is back under load. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten the shock, and you just want to do it to the bushing squishes a little bit. You don't need to crank them down crazy tight. All right, when you're tightening the top nut on the shock, see this little wrench I have here? That's what I use to hold the shock shaft still so it doesn't spin. Otherwise, when you tighten it, see, it just spins the shock and you're not actually tightening it. So with one hand, you hold this little wrench right here while you turn the big wrench. All right, guys, we are on the home stretch. I'm going to do a general service, check the fluids, do an oil change right now, and then we're going to get this guy over to the AC shop tomorrow, and they're going to go through the AC. I ordered a compressor, a dryer, and we're going to get this AC functioning. And then after that, it's over to the alignment shop. And then this car is going to be ready to go. All right, we're draining the rear dip fluid right now. We'll put some fresh 80W90 Valvoline in there and seal that back up. All right, we got to get some gear oil back in here, and you just fill it until it comes out of the fill hole. There we go. That's it. There you go. That's a service differential. All right, I can clearly see that those brakes were probably replaced, you know, a few hundred miles ago. There's not even any brake dust or anything on the retaining clips, and the rotors are good, and it's got brand new pads in there, so don't need to do anything back here. There's also new brake lines. The boots appear to be in good condition. Yeah, those rubber boots are good. Yeah. And well, what I do see here is those need to be changed. Those are the sway bar end links. So we'll go ahead, see the boot is ripped up there. We'll go ahead and pop some new sway bar end links in there. That's the sway bar. And when those break, your sway bar will just bang around. So I'll go ahead and change those out now. All right, we've got the old sway bar end link out, and we're just screwing this one back into the hub. You have a new sway bar end link. So we'll go ahead and get that finished up. All right, we have our new sway bar end links in the car. Very nice. So now we're going to remove the back seat and replace these old original shocks back here. And the way you get access to those is behind the back seat. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, I'm going to do limited recording on this, but the way you get access to those shocks, first you got to slide the seat bottom forward. And the way you do that, there is a red button on this side and another one on that side. And you press that button in and the seat will slide forward. Or you press the button in and it unlocks it. And then you go to the other side, you unlock that side, and then you can slide it forward. And then, once you have that done, you need to move the seat back out of the way. And let's see. There we go. There is a 10 millimeter right there. See if I can get down in here. And we got a 10 millimeter right there. And then you can see the other one right there. We undo those 3 bolts. And then we can lift this seat up and it leans forward or moves forward. We can get access to 2 little access points that lead to the top of the shocks to unscrew them. So we're going to do that now. All right, guys, you see I lifted the seat has these little like hooks molded into it, and they hook onto here. So you lift up from the bottom And there you go, this little slot here, or this little tab here, hooks over that. Anyway, you can lift it up and fold it forward, and you see our access point right here for our shocks. So there we go. We pop that off, and there's the top of our shock right there. So let's go ahead and get these guys out of here. All right, guys, the car is above me. We've removed the 2 nuts on the top of the shocks, and now we just come under the car with a 17 millimeter, and I bet the shock is going to just fall out. And there we go. There is our old shock. Now these things actually, let's see if they're still good. Oh yeah, those things were still working. Yep, those things were still working. But we're going to go ahead and replace them because we've done all the front suspension. So going ahead and do the rear. But those shocks probably would have lasted a little while longer. Here's the new Bilstein HDs. We'll go ahead and open these up. All right, there's our new Bilstein Shock 24007-146. That's the HD, the heavy duty. And they also supply us with all new hardware and bushings. Pretty easy, guys. You just slip it in here. Now you got to get it through the hole in the top. Here we go. That's it. And we put our new hardware in there. We'll just feed one up by hand. And there we go. And now we'll have to go, we'll put the other one in and then go up top and screw our lock nut back on, and we're done with that. All right, the car is back on the ground. We've reattached, instead of using the double nuts, Bilstein supplies us with a lock nut. And then we just put our cover back on here. There we go. And then we fold back our sound insulation and we reattach it around the hook there. And there we go. And let's go ahead and do it to the other side and put our seat back in. Okay, we have the seat back in, and here we go. To put the seat bottom back in, you just want to get all your straps above it. There we go. See, we just pull these out like that, and then we'll slide it back into place. And then we'll just press down to click it in place. There we go. Did you hear it click? Let's get this one. There we go. That easy. All right, guys, we've drained the oil. Now we just need to put a new filter in, fill it up with some oil, and we're ready to drive it over to the AC shop and the alignment shop. There we go. And let's stick our new filter in here. I like to use man filters. I've just used them all. Hengst, or H-E-N-G-X-T or S-T, however you spell that. That's also a good brand. Back on the oil filter cap, it's only like 10 foot-pounds, guys. You do not need to crank these down. Otherwise, you're going to pull out the studs that you're screwing them onto. Those are just studs in the aluminum housing. And then it'll never seal correctly again. And you'll have to repair that. So 10 foot-pounds, guys. That is not much. I'll show you what that looks like. There you go. That's it. That's it. And then we're going to put our air filter housing back on. All right, we'll start with that right there. They take almost 2 gallons of oil. All right, while that oil is drained to the bottom, we're going to put our air filter housing back on. It's just some 10mm nuts that hold the filter housing on there. All right, it says we're exactly in the middle of the 2 lines. So we're going to crank that up and let it run for a minute, and then we'll let it settle back down and top it off if we need to. All right, we are done with the suspension and service on this car. And hope you enjoyed this video series, and we'll see you next time. Take care.